A Freilich in Purim, this is Gemara in Nazir. Daf Mem Gimel, all the learning on this very auspicious day of Purim has been generously sponsored as a Schus Yeshua's Fruit Shleim of Aaron David Ben David B'Siyata Dishmaya. The learning of the entire Chabura should bring only good news, incredible refuah shleima, good test results. Aaron David Ben David, the Schus HaTorah, especially on this incredible day of Purim. And for all those who are going to be listening to this before the Suda, just remember, this is part of the Chelek of Oira Zu Torah. So we pick it up, excuse me, 3 lines from the bottom, and Beis Mebeis, Avol, Toma, V'Toma, Loi. This is going back in the Brisa on the statement of Rabbah. What happened? This was the Brisa yesterday that we learned that there's 2 different types of Toma. That if you have a Toma that is a Toma of the bias, then we said you're going to be over 2 times. However, if it's not Tuma of the bias, then it seemingly is one shame, touch 2 mason or something like that, Magan Hesed, then you're not over 2 times. So says the Gemara, Avol Tuma v'Tuma Lai. If there's Tuma of a corpse and some other type of Tuma, then Lai, then you're not Chayiv 2 times. Says the Gemara, why not? We think that the reason is because you're already Tameh. Excuse me. If you're already Tameh, you can't have a further Tama. So if that is the reason that once you're Tameh, you can't have a further Tama, ask the Gemara, Tama will be a Nami. So if you're Tameh and you come into a house, Tomas Oyel, it should be the same thing. Why did Rabbah differentiate? Say if it's Toma and then you walk into a house, then there is yes 2 chiyuvim. There is yes 2 Tomas. But if it's 2 Tomas of touching and whatnot, then not. What is the difference? Kayim Toma will be a nami ametayim v'kayim. So Amar Rav Yochanan kan bebayis kan besodeh. Says Rav Yochanan, you know what the difference is? If there's a bias, then you have 1 Toma and a 2nd Toma of the oil. Then you have, now what does that mean? So as we're about to see from the explanation of the Gemara, what Rav Yochanan is assuming that you could have a double Toma, a 2-fold transgression of Toma, simultaneously when you walk into a house. The reason is because he's a Nazir, he's not allowed to become Tameh. And so if the Nazir was not Tameh, entered into a house, what happens? And there's a corpse. What happens is there's 2 separate Tomas. There's 2 separate Tomas. Number 1 of becoming Tameh, and of number 2, excuse me, let's be clear. The 2 separate Tomas are 2 psukim that the Nazir can't be Tameh, pasuk 1, and lo yavai, you can't come into a house of Tamah, is pasuk 2. So 2 psukim creates these 2 isurim. It's the same Toma, but 2 different transgressions are happening simultaneously. Whereas Basadeh, you can't have the 2nd form of Toma. Now, as we turn over to Mem Gimel and Aleph, let's just give a dot of an introduction. What's going to happen now is the Gemara is going to try to figure out, is there ever a scenario that you're going to have the Toma of the bias at the precise moment when you become Tameh? Now, if that sounds funny, because of course you're becoming Tameh from being in a house with a corpse, being in the Tomas bias, let's let the Gemara explain itself. Bebayis nami, Mem Gimel and Aleph asked the Gemara, even when you walk into the house, Kiven de ayil yodei, when your hand goes in ista'av, when your hand becomes in ista'av means that's a lashon of Toma, he becomes Tameh. And then, ki ayil kulei hai, when the rest of his body comes in, Tamehu, he's already Tameh. So ask the Gemara, you just suggested that this person could have a dual Tama, that 2 psukim, he becomes Tameh, and lo yava, he walked into the house of Tama. Says the Gemara, how is that possible? The moment your hand gets into the house, the hand is Tameh, your whole body is Tameh. That's Tama of a Nazir, defiling a Nazir, transgressing his Nazirus. But the Tama of the bias, the lo yava, doesn't come till he walks into the house. So says the Gemara, you don't have it simultaneous. Elamar Rav Lazar. Sirif Yada, he says, the Gemara, you know what's going on. He extends his house before he goes into the house. Misham toma ika, misham bialeka. And then Mitzir of Gufai, Tomo biya badi adadika asi, says the Gemara. And then when he walks in, Mitzir of Gufai, when his body goes into his house, the house, Tomo biya badi adadika asi. So the Gemara is suggesting that if he walks in at the same time, then it's going to be time. Now, this is difficult because let's let the Gemara explain itself. Ask the Gemara 1 second. His nose goes in first, meaning if you just walk straight, your nose is going to become tamei. What's going to happen when your nose goes into the house? He's going to be tamei, and only then you're going to have a lo yavai. So again, we're trying to figure out a way that he becomes tamei and the lo yavai could apply simultaneously. And the issue the Gemara is having is you're always going to have a moment in time that part of your body is going to contract tumah before you fully go into the house. So Rava tries again. Hechnes yadim misham tumah ika misham bialeka. Hechnes gufay tumah ubiyah badi adadika asyan. Says Rava, you know what's going on? It's right. You're right. If you put your hand in first, then you're right. You're going to have tumah and you're not going to have biyah. Hechnes gufay. But if he put his body in, now the Gemara didn't say anything different. These are the exact same words we said a moment ago. It said Vitzir of Kufa. Now it's Hichlis Kufa. So the Mepharshim explained he's leaning backwards so that his nose doesn't go in first. So if you lean backwards, then your whole body will go in at one time. Ask the Gemara, what's the problem? Says the Gemara, 1 second, your little toe. As you walk in, your toes are going to go in first. And that limb, the toe, is going to contract toma. So Elam Rababa, attempt number 3 or 4. Here it is. And this Rababa, we actually have had it before. And this concept of Shida and Migdal, we have all over Shas. Says Rababa, he's carried in a box. He's carried in a box. And then what happens? He doesn't become tamei. Why? So one way of learning is the box is partially inside, partially outside. The other way of learning is maybe there's an airspace inside the box. But let's just leave it at this partially inside, partially outside. And therefore the shida table, migdal, this box or carriage, is the barrier that makes sure he's not tamei. And then what happens? Ubacha Veira, his friend comes. Upara loves maziva. His friend comes and removes the roof off the box. When you take the roof off the box, boom! At that moment, at that moment, what happens? At that moment that you take off the roof of the box, he becomes tamei, and it's a lo yavai, because it's the exact same moment that he goes into the house and he contracts the lo yavai. Says the Gemara, that's going to be the case, that you could have 2 isurim simultaneously. Mar Baravashi Amar, a secretary, it's going to Ayel Kishu Goises. You enter the house while the person is a Goises. He's in the death throes. V'nafek Nishmasei Adi Yosef. And then the person was nifter while you are there. So the Nazir walks in and the person's in Goises state. Then he's nifter. So then the Tumabiyah Badi Dadik Asean. Because again, we're creating a scenario that the Nazir can get into the house without becoming tummy. Why is he not tamei? Because the person's a Gaisis, doesn't give off tumah yet. Then, when he is nifter, at that moment, the Nazir violates his Nazirus and contracts via the loyava, the tumah soil at the exact same moment. So Tan Rabbanan, now the Gemara is going to delve a dot deeper into the halacha we just said, which is what? A chiddush perhaps. That a guy says he's on his death throes, he's in the death throes, he's on his deathbed, he doesn't give off tumah yet. So explains the Gemara, and not only does he not give off tumah yet, he as well, the Nazir does not violate his Nazirus by being in proximity of a gaisis. So explains the Gemara, Tan Rabbanan, we're about 20 lines to the bottom. The first line is Leichaloi, says in the Braisa, Leichaloi, to profane himself, for the Nazir to violate his Nazir, is that Sheyamois, is what? At the moment that the person dies. Rabbi Omer, B'moisam yitama, different pasuk, ad sheyamos, until he dies. So seemingly 2 different drashas, leichaloi, b'moisam, teaching us that when do you defile, when is the Nazir violating his Naziros? boom, at the moment of Misa. But a moment beforehand, even though the person might be in his Goysis state, he does not violate his Nazirus. My Beinayu, it sounds like they're saying the same thing. So two answers. Number one says, you're right, it is all the same thing, just a different drasha. The difference is Goyses. According to the first man, it says you learn out from that's included, and you'll violate your Naziros by being in the situation of a Gaisis. In Gaisis loy will only be at the actual death. So now is going to begin the classical case of Gemara Ping Pong as we figure out these two drashas, whether what each man Amar does of the other. Very nice. You say Leichaloi, therefore teaching us that the Nazir violates the Nazirs if he's in proximity of a Gaises. But what about the passes that b'maisam, which sounds like it's only after the death? Answers the Gemara, Mabayle Rebbe, the Tanya Rebbe Omer, b'maisam einay mitam, av mitame b'nigasan ubezivasam. Teaches Rebbe, what does b'maisa teaches us? It teaches us that a Nazir is not allowed to become Tameh, but he's allowed to become Tameh with Saras and with Ziva. A Nazir has a halacha that you're not allowed to touch a mace, but he's allowed to contaminate himself while the person is alive if they are a Mitzaira or a Ziva. And as the Mefarshim here explain, a Nazir is allowed to touch or carry a person with Saras or Ziva even though he's going to become Tameh. Next halacha, mandamar b'maisam hami bayiles. What does the other mandamar do? Hami bayiles svara says the mandamar says b'maisam Rebbe hami bayiles svara. The pasuk is needed to teach this that you actually become tamei. So we have a machlekes over here. Excuse me. They both agree you become tamei, but that's gufo. What the pasuk teaches us that the Nazir is allowed to become tamei for mitzaira and ziva. Ask the Gemara, my b'moisam, shmas mina tarti. There it is. So you can learn out both halachas. You can learn out halacha number one, that the Nazir is allowed to become tamei for mitzaira and ziva. And you learn out halacha number two, that the tum only comes b'moisam at the time of the death, not at koisis. Says the Gemara, what does he do with aksiv leichaloi? What does he do with the pasuk of leichaloi? Which would seem to indicate that the Nazir, is profaned, defiled when the person is a Gaises. Lechaloi lachiudas. They know what it needs it for. B'misheinai mechulal yatzazeh shemechulal ve'oimid. You know what we need this pasuk for? This pasuk teaches us that a kohen is not allowed to become tamei if yatzazeh shemechulal ve'oimid. This kohen is already mechulal. He's already tamei. He's not included in this iser. We finished part one of today's share with the Shaila Meisvei. Says the Braisa, a person does not give up Toma until his soul leaves his body, till he's nifter. Even if he's fatally wounded, he's cut up. Even if he's a Gaises, he still does not give up Toma. But according to the first mandamar, he says that it does not give off toma in the death throes. Ulinian answers the Gemara. Everyone agrees. This really just brings out the lima that we learned a moment ago. With regard to becoming tame, everyone agrees that happens at death. Is that there's a two-step process. The Nazir becomes defiled from the point of the Gaises, but of course, that Mandamar Milachalai agrees that there's not actual Tuma until the person is Nifter. We turn over to Mem Gilmul Amid Beis, Amar Rav Chista, Amar Rav, and we continue within a similar vein that a Kohen is not allowed to become Tami, aside for if his Shiva Kraivim, are nifter, or a meis mitzvah. Those are the two times a kohen is allowed to be mitame himself. So says the Gemara, Amrav Chista Amrav, Nikta Roisha Shel Aviv, if the head of a kohen, if the head of the father's kohen got chopped off, the head of the kohen's father, Einay mitam eloi. He's not allowed to become tamei to him. My timer, because Amar Kro la'aviv. It's Pasuk says to his father, Zanshu Shalim, which infers alive and full person, Lo Bizmanshu Chaser, not when he's lacking. So step number one, he says of Chisda Marav, a kohen cannot become tamei to the head of his father. If the father is nifter, he's allowed, but not just for the head. So Amar Le Rav Hamnuna, I asked Rav Hamnuna 1 second. If he's going in the barons, the Pikta Darvais, Upasku Ganvi the Reshe, and the Ganavim Rahman al chopped off his head. Are you going to tell me that we cannot, his relatives cannot become tummy to him, or he cannot bury his father if while walking in a deserted area they chop off his head? How could that be? So Amar Le Rav Chisda responds, Meis Mitzvah Kamer. 1 second. What are you asking about? You're asking about a Meis Mitzvah. A regular Meis Mitzvah. If you're not related, a Kohen's allowed to become Tamei. Ba'aviv like Kol Shekain, of course he become Tamei too. His father who's a Meis Mitzvah. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Why Meis Mitzvah? You lost. You forgot the definition of Meis Mitzvah. This case can't be a Meis Mitzvah. V'atani, you learned in a Braisa. Ezehu Meis Mitzvah. 10 lines down. First word line is Meis. Kol she'ein loy kai for him if you don't have someone to bury him. Kairaf, they scream out v'acher meinim, and someone answers, I say, ein zeh meis mitzvah. And in this case, where this person was Rachman's son chopped up by Ganavim, v'yislei bra, he has a son. So if he has a son, he's certainly not a meis mitzvah. So what exactly was your question in the first place? Says the Gemara, slow down. Since he was going in the road, it's as if he has no kaivrim. And that's going to be the case that potentially the son could, yes, become tamei to bury the father. Meisvei, so ask the Gemara on Rav Chisda. Again, Rav Chisda just said that you cannot become tamei in all scenarios of the father. But says Rav Chisda that just like you come tamei for a meis mitzvah, in a scenario where the father is chopped up on the deserted path, you could become tamei. So Meisvei, ask the Gemara 1 second. Lo yitama, the pasuk says for her, referring to the Kohen's sister, he can become tamei, which implies law hu metame for a sister. Veina metame leivreha, but he cannot become tamei for her limbs. Why? Lefish eina metame leivre min achai shel aviv. That what? He cannot become tamei for a limb that was severed from the live body of his father. But what is he allowed to do? Once he becomes tamei, says the Brayso, so then even an etzem kisayra, even a teeny little bone the size of a barley grain, he becomes tamei. My machzar al etzem kisayra. What does it mean he can go back for that bone? Lav lememra di mechzar porta does not mean that he even could go back and bury a little bit of the father. So says the Gemara 1 second. If he could go back and bury even a little bit, it would seem he could yes become tamei to a limb of the father. But you Rav Chisda said you can't become tamei for the limb of the father. Answers the Gemara, loy, hahi Rav Yehudi. That's not a kasha, because the Brayso was Rav Yehuda who allows. So we have a machlokes Rav Yehuda and Rav Chisda. Rav Yehuda says you could become tamei even for a limb of the relative. Rav Chisda says no. The Tan Rav Yehuda Aimer lo yitama mitama ve'inu mitama leivra. Why? If you don't tama leivra min achai shel aviv. Says Rav Yehuda, you could yes become tamei to aver min amis, even in the aver of the relative. Now, like Rav Chisda, so we have a machlokes. Rav Chisda says you can only be metameh to the whole dead body of the father, unless it's a situation that the father's like a meis mitzvah. Rav Yehuda says not. So ask the Gemara another kasha on Rav Chisda. The truth is, we're going to stop over here because this kasha is going to take us into the tomorrow's daf of Freilich and Purim and B'siyat Shmaya. We'll pick up from here in the next shiur.